I know, but it wasn't turned on. You want to say hi?
Hi.
Okay. Can you be quiet while I do this? Because this is the good part. This is the end. Chapter 15. There was a Land Rover parked behind the cowshed. The doors were open, and the ignition key was in the lock. I sat on the newspaper-covered passenger seat and watched Jenny Hempstock turn the key. The engine sputtered a few times before it started. I had not imagined any of the Hempstocks driving. I said, "I didn't know you had a car." "Lots of things you don't know," said Mrs. Hempstock tartly. Then she glanced at me more gently and said, "You can't know everything." She backed the Land Rover up, and it bumped its way forward across the ruts and the puddles at the back of the farmyard. There was something on my mind. "Old Mrs. Hempstock said that Letty isn't really dead," I said. "But she looked dead. I think she actually is dead. I don't think it's true that she's not dead." Jenny looked at me like she was going to say something about the nature of truth. But all she said was, "Letty's hurt, very badly. The ocean has taken her, and honestly, I don't know if it will ever give her back. But we can hope, can't we?" Yes. I squeezed my hands into fists, and I hoped as hard as I knew how. We bumped and jolted up the lane at 15 miles per hour, and I said, is she really your daughter?" I didn't know, and I still don't know why I asked her that. Perhaps I just wanted to know more about the girl who had saved my life, who had rescued me more than once. I didn't know anything about her. "More or less," said Jenny. "The men Hempstocks, my brothers, they went out into the world, and they had babies who've had babies. There are Hempstock women out there in your world, and I'll wager that some of them are a wonder in their own way, but only Gran and me and Letty are the pure thing." "She doesn't have a daddy?" I asked. "No." "Did you have a daddy?" "You are all questions, aren't you?" "No, love. We never went in for that sort of thing. You only need men if you want to breed more men." I said, "You don't have to take me home. I could stay with you. I could wait until Letty comes back from the ocean. I could work on your farm and carry stuff and learn to drive a tractor." "No," was all she said, but she said it kindly. "You get on with your own life. Letty gave it to you. We just have to grow up and try to be worth it." A flash of resentment. It's hard enough being alive, trying to survive in the world and find your place in it, to do the things you need to do to get by without wondering if the thing you just did, whatever it was worth someone having, if not died, than having given up their life. It wasn't fair. "Life's not fair," said Jenny, as if I had spoken aloud. She turned onto her driveway and pulled up outside the front door, and I got out, and she did too. "Better make it easier for you to go home," she said. Mrs. Hempstock rang the doorbell, although the door was never locked, and industriously scratched the soles of her Wellington boots on the doormat until my mother opened the door. She was dressed for bed, wearing a pink quilted dressing gown. "Here he is," said Jenny, "safe and sound, soldier back from the wars. He had a lovely time at our Letty's going-away party, but now it's time for this young man to get his rest." My mother looked blank, almost confused, and then the confusion was replaced by a smile, as if the world had reconfigured itself into a form that made sense. "Oh, you didn't have to bring him back," said my mother. "One of us would have come to pick him up." Then she looked down at me. "What do you say to Mrs. Hempstock, darling?" I said it automatically. "Thank you for having me." My mother said, "Very good, dear. Then Letty's going away?" "To Australia," said Jenny, "to be with her father. We'll miss having this little fellow over to play, but we'll let you know when Letty comes back. He can come over to play whenever." I was getting tired. The party had been fun, although I couldn't remember much about it. I knew that I would not visit the Hempstock farm again, though, not unless Letty was there. Australia was a long, long way away, and I wondered how long it would be until she came back from Australia with her father. Years, I supposed. Australia was on the other side of the world, across the ocean. A small part of my mind remembered an alternate pattern of events, and then lost it, as if I had woken from a comfortable sleep and looked around, pulled the bedclothes over me, and returned to my dream. Mrs. Hempstock got back into her ancient Land Rover, so bespattered with mud I could see now, in the light above the front door, that there was almost no trace of the original paintwork visible, and she backed it up, down the drive toward the lane. My mother seemed unbothered by that I had returned home in fancy dress clothes at almost 11 at night. She said, "I have some bad news, dear." "What's that?" "Oh, Ursula's had to leave. Family matters, pressing family matters. She's already left. I know how much you children liked her." I knew that I didn't like her, but I said nothing. There was now nobody sleeping in my bedroom at the top of the stairs. My mother asked if I would like my room back for a while, and I said no, unsure of why I was saying no. I couldn't remember why I disliked Ursula Monkton so much. Indeed, I felt faintly guilty for disliking her so absolutely and so irrationally. But I had no desire to return to that bedroom, despite the little yellow hand basin just my size, and I remained in the shared bedroom until our family moved out of the house half a decade later. We children protesting the adults, I think just relieved that their financial difficulties were over. The house was demolished after we moved out. I wouldn't go and see it standing empty, and I refused to witness the demolition. There was just too much of my life bound up in those bricks and tiles, those drain pipes and walls. Years later, my sister, now an adult herself, confided in me that she believed that our mother had fired Ursula Monkton, whom she remembered so fondly as the only nice one in a sequence of grumpy childminders, because her father was having an affair with her. It was possible, I agreed. Our parents were still alive then, and I could have asked them, but I didn't. My father didn't mention the events of those nights. Not then. Not later. I finally made friends with my father when I entered my 20s. We had so little in common when I was a boy, and I was certain I had been a great disappointment to him. He did not ask for a child with a book, off in his own world. He wanted a son who did what he had done, swam and boxed and played rugby, and drove cars at speeds with abandon and joy. But that was not what he had wound up with. I didn't ever go down the lane all the way to the end. I didn't think of the white Minnie, and when I thought of the opal miner, it was in context of the 2 rough, raw opal rocks that stood on the mantelpiece. And in my memory, he always wore a checked shirt and jeans. His face and arms were tan, not the cherry red of monoxide poisoning, and he had no bow tie. Monster, the ginger tomcat the opal miner had left us, had wandered off to be fed by other families, and although we saw him from time to time prowling the ditches and trees off the side of the lane, he would not ever come when he called. I was relieved by this, I think. He'd never been our cat. We knew it, and so did he. A story only matters, I suspect, to the extent that the people in the story change. But I was 7 when all these things happened, and I was the same person at the end of it as I was at the beginning. Wasn't I? So was everyone else. They must have been. People don't change. Some things change, though. A month or so after the events here, and 5 years before the ramshackle world I lived in was demolished and replaced by trim, squat, regular houses, containing smart young people who worked in the city but lived in my town, who made money by moving money from place to place, but who did not build or dig or farm or weave. And 9 years before I would kiss smiling Callie Anders. I came home from school. The month of May was perhaps early June. She was sitting by the back door as if she knew precisely where she was and who she was looking for. A young black cat, a little larger than a kitten now, with a white splotch over one ear, and with eyes as intense and unusual greenish blue. She followed me into the house. I fed her with an unused can of Monster's cat food, which I spooned into Monster's dusty cat bowl. My parents, who had never noticed the ginger Tom's disappearance, did not initially notice the arrival of the new kitten cat. And by the time my father commented on her existence, she had been living with us for several weeks, exploring the garden until I came home from school, then staying near me while I read or played. At night, she would wait beneath the bed until the lights were turned out, and then she would accommodate herself on the pillow beside me, grooming my hair and purring, so quietly as to never disturb my sister. I would fall asleep with my face pressed into her fur, while her deep electrical purr vibrated softly against my cheek. She had such unusual eyes. They made me think of the seaside, and so I called her Ocean, and could not have told you why. Epilogue. I sat on the dilapidated green bench beside the duck pond in the back of the red brick farmhouse, and I thought about my kitten. I only remembered that Ocean had grown into a cat and that I adored her for years. I wondered what had happened to her, and then I thought, it doesn't matter that I can't remember the details any longer. Death happened to her. Death happens to all of us. A door opened in the farmhouse, and I heard feet on the path. Soon the old woman sat beside me. "Brung you a cup of tea," she said, "and a cheese and tomato sandwich. You've been out here for quite a while. I thought you'd probably fallen in." "Sort of did," I told her. "Thank you." It had become dusk without my noticing while I'd been sitting there. I took the tea and sipped it, and I looked at the woman more carefully this time. I compared her to my memories of 40 years ago. I said, "You aren't Letty's mother. You're her grandmother, aren't you? You're old Mrs. Hemstock." "That's right," she said, unperturbed. "Eat your sandwich." I took a bite of my sandwich. It was good, really good. Freshly baked bread, sharp, salty cheese, and the kind of tomatoes that actually taste like something. I was awash in memory, and I wanted to know what it meant. And I said, "Is it true?" I felt foolish. Of all the questions I could have asked, I had asked that. Old Mrs. Hempstock shrugged. What you remembered? Probably, more or less. Different people remember things differently, and you'll not get any two people to remember anything the same, whether they were there or not. You stand two of you lot next to each other, and you could be continents away from it all if it means anything. There was another question I needed answered, and I said, "Why did I come here?" She looked at me as if it were a trick question. The funeral. You wanted to get away from everyone and be on your own. So first of all, you drove back to the place you lived in as a boy, and when that didn't give you what you missed, you drove to the end of the lane and you came here, like you always do. Like I always do. I drank some more tea. It was still hot and strong enough. A perfect cup of builder's tea. You could stand a spoon straight up in it, as my father always said. A cup of tea which he would approve. Like you always do, she repeated. No, I said. You're wrong. I mean, I haven't been here since Letty went to Australia, her going away party. And then I said, which never happened. You know what I mean? You come back sometimes, she said. You were here once when you were 24. I remember you had 2 small children and you were so scared. You came here before you left this part of the world. You were, what, in your 30s then? I fed you a good meal in the kitchen, and you told me about your dreams and the art you were making. I don't remember. She pushed the hair from her eyes. It's easier that way. I sipped my tea and finished the sandwich. The mug was white, and so was the plate. The endless summer evening was coming to an end. I asked her again, why did I come here? Letty wanted to see you, said somebody. The person who said this was walking around the pond, a woman in a brown coat wearing Wellington boots. I looked at her in confusion. She looked younger than I was now. I remembered her as vast, as adult. But now I saw she was only in her late 30s. I remembered her as stout, but she was buxom and attractive in an apple-cheeked sort of way. She was still Jenny Hempstock, Letty's mother, and she looked, I was certain, just as she looked 40-something years ago. She sat down on the bench on the other side of me, so I was flanked by Hempstock women. She said, I think Letty just wants to know if it was worth it. If what was worth it? You, she said tartly. Letty did a very big thing for you, Jenny said. I think she mostly wants to find out what happened next and whether it was worth everything she did. She sacrificed herself for me. After a fashion, dear, said Jenny. The hunger birds tore out your heart. You screamed so piteously as you died. She couldn't abide that. She had to do something. I tried to remember this. I said, this isn't how I remember it. I thought about my heart then, and I wondered if there was a cold fragment of a doorway inside it still, and if it was a gift or a curse, if there was. The old lady sniffed. Didn't I just say you'll never get any 2 people to remember anything the same? She asked. Can I talk to her? To Letty? She's sleeping, said Letty's mother. She's healing. She's not talking yet. Not until she's all done with where she is, said Letty's grandmother, gesturing. But I couldn't tell if she was pointing to the duck pond or to the sky. When will that be? When she's good and ready, said the old woman, as her daughter had said. Soon. Well, I said, if she brought me here to look at me, let her look at me. And even as I said it, I knew that it had already happened. How long had I been sitting on that bench staring into the pond? As I had been remembering her, she had been examining me. Oh, she did it already, didn't she? Yes, dear. And did I pass? The face of the old woman on my right was unreadable in the gathering dust. On my left, the younger woman said, You don't pass or fail at being a person, dear. I put the empty cup and plate down on the ground. Jenny Hempstock said, I think you're doing better than you were the last time we saw you. You're growing a new heart, for a start. In my memory, she was a mountainous woman, and I had sobbed and shivered on her bosom. And now she was smaller than I was, and I couldn't imagine her comforting me, not in that way. The moon was full in the sky above the pond, and I could not for the life of me remember what phase the moon had been in the last time I noticed it. I couldn't actually remember the last time I had done more than glance at the moon. So what will happen now? Same things happens every time you come here. You go home. I don't know where that is anymore, I told him. You always say that, said Jenny. In my head, Letty Hempstock was still a full head taller than I was. She was 11, after all. I wondered what I would see, who I would see, if she stood before me now. The moon in the duck pond was full as well, and I found myself, unbidden, thinking of the holy fools in the old stories, the ones who had gone fishing in a lake for the moon with nets, convinced that the reflection in the water was nearer and easier to catch than the globe that hung in the sky. And of course, it always is. I got up and walked a few steps to the edge of the pond. Letty, I said, aloud, trying to ignore the two women behind me. Thank you for saving my life. She should never have taken you with her in the first place when she went off to find the start of it all, sniffed old Mrs. Hempstock. Nothing to sort her starting it all out on her own. Didn't need to take you along for company, silly thing. Well, that'll learn her for next time. I turned and looked at old Mrs. Hempstock. Do you really remember when the moon was made? I asked. I remember lots of things, she said. Will I come back here again? I asked. It's not for you to know, said the old woman. Get along now, said Jenny Hempstock gently. There's people who are wondering where you've got to. And when she mentioned them, I realized with an awkward horror that my sister, her husband, her children, all the well-wishers and mourners and visitors would be puzzling over what had become of me. Still, if there was a day that they would find my absent ways easy to forgive, it was today. It had been a long day and a hard one. I was glad that it was over. I said, I hope I haven't been a bother. No, dear, said the old woman, not a bother at all. I heard a cat meow. A moment later it sauntered out of the shadows and into a patch of bright moonlight. It approached me confidently, pushed its head against my shoe. I crouched beside it and scratched its forehead and stroked its back. It was a beautiful cat, black, or so I imagined, the moonlight having swallowed the color of things. It had a white spot over one ear. I said, I used to have a cat like this. I called her Ocean. She was beautiful. I don't actually remember what happened to her. You brought her back to us, said Jenny Hempstock. She touched my shoulder with her hand, squeezing it for a heartbeat. She touched my cheek with her fingertips as if I were a small child or a lover, and then she walked away, back into the night. I picked up my plate and my mug, and I carried them along the path with me as we made our way back to the house, the old woman and I. The moon doth shine as bright as day, I said, like in the song. It's good to have a full moon, she agreed. I said, it's funny. For a moment I thought there were two of you. Isn't that odd? It's just me, said the old woman. It's only ever just me. I know, I said. Of course it is. I was going to take the plate and mug to the kitchen and put them in the sink, but she stopped me at the farmhouse door. You ought to get back to your family now, she said. They'll be sending out a search party. They'll forgive me, I said. I hoped that they would. My sister would be concerned, and there would be people I barely knew disappointed not to have told me how very, very sorry they were for my loss. You've been so kind, letting me sit and think here by the pond. I'm very grateful. Stuff and nonsense. Nothing kind about it. Next time Letty writes from Australia, I said, please tell her I said hello. I will. She'll be glad you thought of her. I got into the car and started the engine, and the old woman stood in the doorway, watching me politely until I had turned the car around and was on my way back up the lane. I looked back at the farmhouse in the rearview mirror, and a trick of the light made it seem as if two moons hung in the sky above, like a pair of eyes watching me from above. One moon perfectly full and round, the other its twin on the other side of the sky, a half-moon. Curiously, I turned in my seat and looked back. A single half-moon hung over the farmhouse, peaceful and pale and perfect. I wondered where the illusion of the second moon had come from, but I only wondered for a moment, and then I dismissed it, for my thoughts. Perhaps it was an after-image, I decided, or a ghost, something that had stirred in my mind for a moment, so powerfully that I believed it to be real, but now was gone and faded into the past like a memory forgotten, or a shadow into the dusk. The end.